Hello, I'm Hannah, and welcome back to the hidden side of deception. We're here, as we are every week, to dive into the complexities of human relationships, to shine a light on those shadows we often struggle to see, and to create a space for understanding and empathy.
And I'm Ryan. In today's episode, we'll address a topic that is perhaps one of the most painful and life-altering in a person's life: betrayal within a relationship. We're going to go beyond the simple act of infidelity and delve into the psychological, emotional, and even physical impact this event has on the person who is cheated on.
It's a topic that hits very close to home. While preparing for this episode, I read a true story that was sent to us anonymously. And honestly, the vulnerability and sincerity with which it was shared really moved me. I think it's the perfect starting point for our conversation.
That's a great point, Hannah. And I want to take this opportunity to remind our listeners that we're not here to judge or point fingers. We're here to understand, to learn from the experiences, not just of those who write to us, but from our own, so we can navigate these situations with greater awareness.
The story we received goes like this. I don't know when my life broke. One day, I was choosing flowers for my wedding, and the next, I felt like my world was crumbling down. Her name won't be used, but we'll call her Laura. Laura was engaged to Marcos. They had been together for 5 years. Everything was ready. The date, the venue, the dress, even the honeymoon was booked. But at her bachelorette party, something happened. And no, it wasn't an accident or something that could be excused with alcohol. She chose to be with another man. The worst part, Ryan, is that it wasn't just physical. There was emotional intimacy that night.
And here, many listeners might be thinking, why would someone do something like that right before getting married? That's the question we're going to break down today, because betrayal isn't just the act itself. It's the devastating impact it leaves on the person who is cheated on. That's the part that truly matters.
Laura wrote to me that the next day, guilt consumed her. She couldn't look Marcos in the eye. And here comes the real gut punch. He found out through a voicemail that one of his friends forwarded to him. An audio recorded that same night where she was laughing and said something she never imagined Marcos would hear.
This is devastating, not just because of the act, but because of how he found out. There was no voluntary confession, there was exposure. And for the cheated partner, that adds a layer of shame and humiliation that multiplies the damage.
Exactly. And this is why I want to pause for a second and ask those listening, what hurts more, the betrayal itself or the way you find out? If you want to share your thoughts, you can write to us at our email address. Your reflections enrich this space and help others going through the same thing.
What happened next was an emotional collapse. Marcos felt that everything he had built was falling apart. His self-esteem, his trust in her, his vision of the future. And that brings us to the core of today's episode: the betrayal of the bond and its impact on the mental health of the cheated partner.
Betrayal isn't just an event, it's an emotional earthquake. And like any earthquake, it doesn't just crack the surface, it shatters the foundations. I want us to talk about that, Ryan.
Yes, because the first thing that appears after discovering infidelity is a brutal mix of emotions: shock, anger, sadness, confusion, and a deep feeling of shame. And it's important to say here, the shame isn't because you did something wrong, but because someone exposed you to a situation that humbles you.
And the worst part is that often the cheated person starts asking themselves, what did I do wrong? Why wasn't I enough? That internal dialogue is poisonous and is one of the first things that needs to be dismantled.
Absolutely. And by the way, if you're going through something like this right now, I want you to know you are not alone. I invite you, if you can, to pause this episode and write down 3 things that remind you of your personal worth. It's a simple exercise, but it can help you start rebuilding.
And now we're going to get into a deeper analysis, the immediate psychological impact. According to studies in clinical psychology, infidelity can trigger symptoms similar to post-traumatic stress, flashbacks, insomnia, extreme anxiety, and difficulty concentrating.
That's right. And these symptoms can last for weeks or months if they're not addressed. That's why betrayal is so dangerous for mental health. It's not just an emotional wound, it's a psychological wound that can become chronic.
Here's an anonymous example. A man who wrote to us from Texas told us that after discovering his wife's infidelity, he spent 3 months sleeping on the couch because he couldn't be in the same bed. He would get heart palpitations every time he heard her voice.
That's a clear sign that the body reacts as if it's under a constant threat. And here, Hannah, I want to bring up something that's rarely talked about. The cheated person not only loses trust in their partner, but also in their own ability to perceive reality.
Exactly, and that's terrible because it's like having the ground pulled out from under you. You start to doubt your memories, your judgments, even your intuition.
That's why it's so important to talk about this, and I'll take this opportunity to make another invitation. If you're listening and you want us to analyze your story in a future episode, write to us at our email address. Your experience, told anonymously, can help many people.
And you know, Ryan, this is where something psychologists call relational betrayal comes into play. It's more than just infidelity. It's breaking an implicit pact of safety and loyalty that held the relationship together. When that pact is broken, the mind interprets it as a direct threat to emotional stability and one's very identity.
Yes, and that's why many cheated partners feel like they aren't themselves anymore after a betrayal. It's as if their previous version of themselves has disappeared.
And that hurts in a very specific way, because you not only lose the person you trusted, but you lose the security of who you were when you were with that person.
This is compounded by a very destructive cycle of thoughts. First comes the shock and disbelief. No, this can't be happening. Then the attempt to find logical explanations. And finally, anger and sadness mixed together.
And in the end, the person finds themselves trapped in an emotional roller coaster that is physically and mentally exhausting. That's why many end up developing chronic anxiety or depression.
There's a statistic that shocked me. In a study published in the Journal of Social and Personal Relationships, it was found that people who have been cheated on are 44% more likely to experience moderate to severe depressive symptoms during the first year after the betrayal.
And that's not even counting the impact on self-esteem. A listener wrote to me and said, "Since he cheated on me, I feel like I'm worthless. I don't even look at myself in the mirror." That is pure pain.
Yes, and that's where we have to differentiate between guilt and shame. Guilt can be useful if it leads to actions for improvement, but shame crushes you because it doesn't focus on what happened, but on who you are.
Exactly. And shame tells you you are the problem, and that is completely false in the case of the cheated partner. But if it isn't worked through, that internal narrative can stick around for years.
And this brings me to something important, the social environment. When infidelity becomes public, shame increases because the cheated person fears being judged, pitied, or singled out.
And that can isolate them even more. I remember a true story that came to us from New York. A woman who, after her husband cheated on her with a coworker, stopped hanging out with her friend group because she felt that everyone knew what had happened.
That's another layer of pain. Social isolation. It's not just the internal impact, your external world changes too.
And here, I want to invite listeners to tell us, how did your social life change after a betrayal? Did you isolate yourself, or did you seek support? Your answers can help others feel understood. You can do so by leaving a comment or writing to us at our email address.
Another point we need to touch on is the physical impact, because it's not just psychological. The body responds with insomnia, weight loss or gain, digestive problems, muscle aches.
Yes, the body somatizes the pain. I remember a listener told us that after discovering his partner's infidelity, he started having such severe panic attacks that he ended up in the emergency room thinking he was having a heart attack.
And that's because the body and mind don't function separately. The impact of betrayal is a trauma that activates the nervous system as if you were under a constant threat.
That's why seeking professional help is so crucial. Not to forget what happened, but to learn to process it so it doesn't destroy you from the inside.
Exactly, and here it must be said, not everyone chooses to stay after a betrayal. Some people decide to leave, and that is a valid and respectable decision.
Yes, because staying is not always synonymous with strength, and leaving is not always a sign of weakness. The important thing is to choose what allows you to heal and live in peace.
And here I want to leave an open question for those listening. Do you believe it's possible to rebuild trust after a betrayal? Leave your thoughts in the comments because in future episodes we'll analyze real strategies that have worked.
And speaking of trust, Ryan, this is one of the topics that generates the most questions. Many people say, if I stay, how do I know it won't happen again?
It's a tough question, and the truth is there are no absolute guarantees. Rebuilding trust is a joint effort that requires transparency, constant communication, and above all, consistent actions over time.
And those actions can't just be pretty promises. The person who betrayed must be willing to go through an uncomfortable process of accountability and show tangible changes.
Yes, but it's also important that the cheated person doesn't become an obsessive detective. Extreme vigilance can end up being as draining as the initial betrayal.
That reminds me of a case we received from California. A woman decided to stay with her husband after discovering he was cheating. For the first few months, she checked every message, every call, every location, and ended up emotionally exhausted.
And here's the key point. Rebuilding isn't just about the other person proving they've changed. It's about you regaining your internal sense of security. Without that, the relationship becomes an emotional prison.
Right, because trust isn't a contract, it's a feeling. And if you don't feel it, no matter how much proof they give you, it won't work.
Another important aspect is understanding that betrayal can leave invisible wounds that appear later. For example, emotional triggers, smells, songs, places.
Yes, something as simple as driving past the restaurant where they had dinner the night before the infidelity can bring back all the pain. And if you don't know how to manage it, that can become a constant source of suffering.
That's why in therapy, we work a lot on identifying those triggers and deactivating their emotional charge. It's a slow process, but it's possible.
And for our listeners, I'd like to suggest an exercise. On a piece of paper, write down 3 things that cause you pain today when you remember the betrayal. Then, next to each one, write an action you could take to lessen its power.
I love that idea, Hannah. And I'll take this opportunity to invite you to write to us at our email address, which you already know is in the video description, if you want to share your progress or struggles. Everything is kept anonymous, and many of these stories end up helping other listeners.
Another thing I notice in many cases is the social pressure to get over what happened quickly, as if there's a deadline for when you should stop feeling pain.
And that is a huge mistake. Everyone has their own pace, and forcing healing only leads to more frustration.
Plus, healing isn't linear. There are days when you think you're fine and suddenly everything hurts again. That doesn't mean you've gone backward, it means the process is still active.
Exactly. And here, the key is self-compassion. Treat yourself with the same patience and care you would give to a friend in your situation.
I want to share something personal. A few years ago, a very close friend was cheated on. I saw her go from absolute rage to inconsolable tears in a matter of minutes. What hurt her the most wasn't losing her partner, but the image of the relationship she had built in her mind.
Yes, because sometimes we don't mourn the person who left, but the version of ourselves we were when everything felt safe.
That is profoundly true. And if you're listening to this and you relate, please don't judge yourself. It's natural to miss the calm you had before, even if you don't want to get back with that person.
And here I'll go back to the key question, is it possible to rebuild after a betrayal? The short answer is yes, but it doesn't always mean staying together. Sometimes rebuilding is done separately.
Exactly, because the goal isn't to go back to how things were, but to build something new, either together or apart, that is based on truth and respect.
And you, the listener, if you've lived through this, we'd love to hear your perspective. Leave it in the comments or send it by email. Maybe in the next episode, we can dive deeper into your story.
Ryan, I think there's something we need to make very clear before we close. Betrayal does not define your worth.
Exactly. What someone did to you says more about that person than it does about you. You are not less worthy of love. You are not less valuable. You are not insufficient because of what happened.
And even if it seems impossible now, this pain will not last forever. With help, with time, with personal work, you can learn to trust again, even if for now that word seems impossible to say.
I also want to leave a message for those who have betrayed someone. If you truly want to repair the damage, you must understand that there are no shortcuts. The wound you caused doesn't disappear with a sorry. It requires sustained action, patience, and accepting that the other person has the right to not want to continue.
And for those listening who are in the middle of the storm, remember that asking for help is not a sign of weakness. Seeking support from friends, family, or professionals can make the difference between being trapped in pain and starting to heal.
If this episode moved you, we want to hear from you. Tell us in the comments, have you experienced a betrayal like this? What was the most difficult part for you?
Or if you prefer, write to us at our email and tell us your story anonymously. Perhaps we can analyze it in a future episode and help others who are going through the same thing.
Also, if you think this content can help someone, please share it. You never know who might need to hear this today.
And remember to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you don't miss our upcoming episodes. Here on The Hidden Side of Deception, we'll always speak with honesty, empathy, and without judgment.
Thanks for joining us today. We'll hear you on the next episode.